Hey, so according to the Google notification I just saw, we have to get this thing done in 8 hours because that's the longest Google Hangout they'll do. Um, so, Brad, you're going to have to go a little short today. Is that all right?
Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Hey, so I haven't recorded one of these in a while. This is a fresh, new session from Jam's virtual Drupal camp, which is a piece of the Acquia podcast. That's where I have the great privilege of talking with smart people, open source and Drupal and technology and community and business and how it all intertwines. This is a part of the podcast where I find things that have come out that sound interesting or important going on in the Drupal community, people presenting sessions around the world that I'd like to have findable. I'd like to make sure that our community can get a hold of those now and in the future. So in that vein, Brad Czerniak, welcome to my Drupal camp. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Yourself?
Cool. Well, yeah, I mean, I've been on the road pretty hardcore for a couple weeks, so it's probably a little too early to ask me. Where are you physically?
Just outside of Detroit in Michigan in the USA.
Cool. Okay. You wrote a blog post that caught my eye a while back talking about taking Drupal to a hackathon, and that got us talk a bit, and that's why you're here today. And I want to get to, so today I want to find out who you are, what you do. I want to talk a little bit about hackathons, especially in the context of sort of leading technologies at hackathons, because I'm only really familiar with the loving, positive, collaborative kind of hackathons that we do at Drupal events where the technology choice is already obvious. So I'm a little bit curious about that. And then I'm going to hand this over to you to present your session about the development principles that you follow and where you work and how they sort of function well at a hackathon because it's all about design, efficiency, folding up code right, using features and all of that stuff. So sound good?
Sounds great.
Brad, you work at a Drupal shop called, well, you work at a development shop called Commercial Progression. Is that a Drupal-only shop, or what do you good folks do?
Yes, that is Commercial Progression is a Drupal-only shop right here in Northville, Michigan, and we work with clients of all sizes, picking up either inheriting clients from previous developers, because we're pretty well known for prompt and friendly service, and then brand new site builds ranging in all different sorts of sizes, and they're all built on Drupal.
Cool. Okay. So I'm noticing that there's some delay in the
Sure.
audio and the picture is not completely connected, but we'll do our best today. I've been having some problems with my connection, so hopefully we'll manage to get comprehensible, useful information out of this.
Sure.
How did you find Drupal? What's your first Drupal memory?
My first Drupal memory was when I was in a previous life. I was a librarian, and when I was getting the job before this one at Commercial Progression, I was working for Canton Public Library, and they were in the process of building a new site, and they were bringing me on as a developer to do that, and they hadn't completely decided yet. And so my very first Drupal install was what ended up becoming the production site for that library. And it was built in D6, yeah.
I believe that's what's called trial by fire in most places.
Yeah.
And so what made you stay with Drupal then?
Oh, I mean, I immediately fell in love. I had done some WordPress work and had written plain PHP applications. Wrote a Facebook app right when their API first came out, stuff like that. And with Drupal, just the idea of content types just that like was a kind of a revelation to me. So
The content architecture spoke to your librarian brain.
yes, it did. Yes, that's a great way to put it.
So, what's your? Let me think about this. Do you see a lot of parallels between the way that librarians think about the world? I suppose in structure, maybe that's an easy question, but what about in terms of the open source ethos, how we practice collaboration and transparency? Does that fit well into the librarian's world as well?
I believe so, and as we'll discuss a little bit later, it was part of my pitch was to when going to the hackathon was libraries and having an open information, having principles of that built into the code of ethics really fits well, meshes well with the open source world, and you see that in a lot of listservs and news groups and things like that, where people are talking about open source technology in libraries. But I guess more to the point, technologically, specific to Drupal, a lot of some of that content architecture kind of maps exactly to the information architecture principles that you might find going through a computer course in one of the more modern library schools.
Okay, so I've seen the movie about your hackathon experience, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but the talk about principles and ethics didn't go down so well. So we're going to try the pitch you did, the idealistic one, and then the pitch that you should have done.
Right.
Now, exactly, that's a perfect segue point for us. There was a call. There was an announcement that there was going to be a hackathon near you to build what?
To build a mobile app for the Detroit Public Library. The digital divide is a big issue. People with lower incomes and not much access to a desktop computer or even really good hardware. These people are underserved in the population, especially when people with a full technology stack can get a lot more done. So it's important to provide that sort of access, and mobile kind of bridges that.
Okay, so this was a very public-spirited action, and how was that? When the hackathon was announced, was there a spec published ahead of time? Was there a feature list? How does this sort of thing work?
Well, it really goes hackathon to hackathon, because when last year we did an event for Code Michigan, so it was the state sponsored it, put on a whole big thing, and they had a much better spec for the end result, and said, hey, here's a whole bunch of data. These are the APIs we want you to focus on, and this is what we'd like to see in the end. With the DPL one, a lot of that came from about a 10-minute presentation at the beginning. So somebody came in and presented and said what we're looking for, and so it was a little bit more open-ended, but the word app was kind of the operative term there. So a Drupal-based website was kind of at a disadvantage from the get-go.
But you had to know that going in that you'd at least be getting your responsive chops exercised, I guess, if they were talking about a mobile something right out of the gate.
Right.
So you show up at this event. I'm interested. How many people showed up, and do you know what technologies they were all working with? How And were you working by yourself? Were you able to form a team? How did that all go down? I'm trying to picture, and completely innocently, I know Drupal camps,
Sure.
right? I know Drupal cons. So Oklahoma tornado disaster happens, and 75 people at Portland DrupalCon sit down in a room, right, and work together to make the help for OK application, and then we open source that code so other people. So I'm really familiar with our context, and sadly, completely innocent and naive with regard to any other kind of situation. So fill me in on that whole how the day went down, how things got started.
Sure. It started on a Friday evening, so everybody got out of work and got down there. There's a great space in Detroit called Grand Circus. They do classes and things like that. It's just a great space. Whiteboards on all the walls. Plenty of electrical plugs. So I mean, like, this is a cool place to do an event like this. And then they catered out the whole weekend, so always a good time when you get your free food. But there were about 45 of us. And many of them were co-workers from their respective companies, so they would come in and they already had teams. I was intending to come down with Andy, our designer, and he and I would collaborate. He ended up having to pull out at the last minute, so when I got down there, I actually got teamed up with one of the other people who was there solo.
Brad.
Hello.
Hey.
Was it I who dropped out?
So I think I dropped out,
Okay.
and it would appear that we're still live.
Okay.
I don't know how much got recorded and how much was missed just because I was out for a second.
Sure.
So at the risk of you repeating yourself, why don't you? So I know that you got down to the space on Friday night,
Sure.
and there was catering, and then I was out.
Okay. Yeah, there were about 45 people, and a lot of them were teams of coworkers from their respective companies. I was intending to go down with our in-house designer, Andy, and he and I would be working together. He ended up having to pull out, so I went down there solo, and very early in the process, I got teamed up with somebody else who came solo. So Sharon was a huge help. She didn't have a lot of Drupal experience, so we got a staging environment set up, and she went and did a lot of content work and worked through the night. It was crazy. So, but yeah, just different teams like that. And they were working on all different types of stacks. There were people making iOS native apps. There were a couple of people who made static responsive sites, and a number of people there had more design chops than development. So some of them were more proofs of concept than anything else, but a whole bunch of really nice demos. So I had a good time watching the
very, very beautiful. I was going to say very beautiful proofs of concept, maybe.
Yes.
So, right now, you work through the weekend. Tell us what you built, and I know you're going to talk about this more, but just so you know, the highest level, what you built, what it did, and how Drupal helped you do that.
Sure. We more or less redid their website into Drupal 7, made it fully responsive, and put in as much real content as possible. And we did it in a way that if they wanted to use that as a jumping off point, they could. So rather than trying to make really hasty proofs of concept, we focused on making sure there was a good fundamental core of content and things like that.
So your functionality really worked, and it was really ready to be extended. It was really ready to go to work. It wasn't sort of living wireframes or something, right?
Right, exactly. So just putting
Yeah,
things
so
in.
we say this a lot. Yeah, so we say this a lot as Drupal service providers when we're pitching clients, when we're talking about our technology. Say, so Drupal is really able to build you a functioning, working site app, backend, Facebook app, whatever it is, within a couple of days, within a week. I mean, depending on the complexity, within an incredibly compact time frame, because if you don't worry too much about how it looks and you just get the functionality right, we've got this incredible toolkit all sitting in the UI, and in the very best cases, we can just sew our modules together with some glue code, and because people are pretty good about writing good modules and nowadays, and pretty good about compatibility, and chaos tools is pretty universal, and of course everybody uses views. That so do you think that worked? Do you think that worked to your advantage? And do you think they could have taken your thing and then turned it into the city website or the library website?
Absolutely. In terms of glue code, I only really wrote one form that got put into a block. Everything else was stuff built from contrib through the UI. So I mean, it was the site build part of the thing of a typical project, and then taking a starter theme and just really fast tracking through it and making something that looked nice. So yeah, absolutely. Even if they ditched a content type, or if they ditched the theme and went to something else, all the things there were fundamentally sound. And
okay, nice. So you
really
did
quickly. Yeah.
Right. So you did a completely working, minimum viable product for the library in 2 days, basically.
It was a little less than 1 day. It was 23 hours.
Oh, 20. Oh, so you finished Saturday evening.
Right, yes. And then after being awake all that time, went to a party. What can you do?
You have to. You have to. After all that work. So we touched on this before, but also in your blog post, and I'll quote it here. I highly recommend this blog post to everyone listening, and I'm going to post it in the show notes. 10 things I learned using Drupal at a hackathon. It's really, really worth reading. So point number 2, you've built the thing and you've got to pitch it, and you write, sell the solution, not the philosophy. I think all the work came off the rails when I opened my stupid mouth in front of the judges. Instead of doing an in-depth demo of how functionally complete the site was and how well it worked on mobile, I spent a decent chunk of the allotted 5 minutes talking about open source software and how platform apps aren't the right fit. So, now, as someone who speaks with businesses about this sort of thing a lot, the more common risk, right, is that as technologists we talk about features, like, oh, it does this and it has WYSIWYG, and look how, all the bells and whistles are exciting for us, and we're supposed to sell the benefits to the potential client or the customer we have. And it sounds like you kind of went off the deep end on another part of the spectrum, which I haven't heard of so much. So you basically went in and pitched about how, as you said, you went in and pitched about how the philosophy behind Drupal should match well with a librarian's ideals and take on life and how things should work, and that's why they should take your app, right? So I want to hear just a thumbnail sketch of what you had to say then, and then I'd like to challenge you to give a micro version of the pitch that you should have given.
Well, sure. I think you hit it exactly. I went up there and, well, first off, there are 2 points. It really helps if you're awake when you're giving a pitch, and if you're given a format ahead of time and sort of the deliverable that says, hey, we're done and we're ready to pitch, was send us a slide deck. And so I was kind of ready to deliver in that format. And I think other people in the room must have been more keen because they kind of just went, okay, I'm going to send one slide or something. And so I was keen on doing like bullet points and going up there and presenting, and that was problematic. So I went up there and I said, first off, the entire premise here of building an app is wrong, which that's a great way to endear yourself to the judges. And so then I explained, like, a responsive site, you're not going to have to maintain multiple code bases for different platforms. It's going to work on different devices on day one. So a responsive website is a great solution. And then went into how Drupal as an open source product and all of the open resources that I had used, like Google Fonts with open licenses and imagery and all that stuff, how all of that meshed with having open information and keeping things workable and free for them. So if I had spent a little bit less of this 5-minute pitch trying to convey that and just going in, and I guess this would be without having a demo open, just being like, so this is page X, look at our branch locator, it's got a cool map, you can click on this and see the address, those sort of features, and going through and showing that they work, that there's data there, and then even exploring the back-end interface. And I think that's probably one of the big advantages that a Drupal app has over some of the platform ones, is you can show them how easy it is to manage the content. It's a content management system. It's great. So with a platform app, that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, so you think a winning pitch might have been actually pretty heavily feature focused. So, but maybe saying, I'm extrapolating a little bit here, but like, oh, here's the back end, and you've got this new book in the library, and look how easy it is, like author photo, ISBN number, title, description, and then click, and there it is, and here it is in the catalog, and then just gone through 3 or 4 things to make it clear that it was a sort of a complete solution.
Mm-hmm. And some of the other things that people who did pitches, including the winning app, they had their concept loaded on a device, and they would like hand a tablet or hand a phone to the judges and say, "Hey, check out how this works." So those are the sort of things that, like, making it tangible for them is a big help. And one of the judges was the person who came up and delivered the informal spec ahead of time, and I really wish I would have taken the opportunity to go over and talk to him, because they had, like, the Detroit Public Library currently has a Drupal 6 site, and they had been advised at a certain point to wait until Drupal 8, because Drupal 8 comes out of the box with responsive stuff, and so the implication is that Drupal 7 isn't responsive ready, or this, that, the other, and it's really easy to make a responsive site in pretty much any platform, but that was the impression that they had, and I didn't know that until after the pitch.
Ah, so okay. So here's some tips. Taking Drupal to hackathons. Listen carefully to the requirements. You said something in your blog post about preparing ahead of time. So in this case, you could have had the chance to talk with this particular judge, you think, and get a little more insight into the preconceptions and the problems you were facing?
I kind of assume that. I don't know how appropriate it is to kind of collude with people, but if you have that opportunity and you can and you feel comfortable doing it at a particular hackathon, absolutely do it. Get as much information as you can. Yeah. Sure.
And I mean, you're actually, if they're the stakeholder, you're trying to make something to benefit them, and everybody's there in the friendly spirit of making the world a better place, more or less. I think that's probably fair enough. And let's see. Right. Don't demo your philosophy. Demo what your code does. And I suppose my tip on that kind of a demo would be. So I loved that some of them presented it on an actual device. That feels like it would be really winning. But I would also go through and say, look, my thing does this and this and this, and then that will make life better for the following stakeholders. Like, this will make it better for library visitors, and this will make it better for administrators, and this will make it better for librarians, and this will save you money, and this will save you time. If you sorry, working in the benefits that the future brings you, probably never hurts as well. Anyway, sounds like you did a cool thing. I hope that you're now building a fully fledged and themed library distribution to open source for the community very soon. When are you releasing that?
Later this week, I believe. That's I wish I had the time to. There's actually some really cool things to check out if you are in the library world and are looking for that thing, and you're listening to this podcast right now. And we might be able to put those up as links for you.
Okay, so you're going to send me some notes, stuff that library people will think is cool, and in the Drupal world, and we'll link to that. So what happens now is that I'm going to hand over the presentation screen to you. If you are listening to the podcast is going to stop in a second, and if you want to see Brad's presentation, if you want to read more about this, see more about this, here's how it works. You go to acquia.com/podcasts. You find this podcast. You go to the podcast page. There's going to be the video of the session. Brad's slides are going to be embedded. We're going to give you a bunch of links about libraries and whatever information, what other information comes up in this. And you can read all that and see all that. And right, so podcast people, thank you for listening. Come over to acquia.com and check that stuff out. Brad, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I am going to hand this over to you now. So you should share your screen, pull up your slides, and I suppose the one thing I should say is that so the stuff that Drupal brings to the table as far as rapid development and bringing, becoming a healthy minimum viable product that helped Brad in a hackathon make a really useful application. Brad's going to talk about some development principles and some ways that he and his colleagues at Commercial Progression see and use Drupal, some tips about like do all these things and avoid all these other things, and that all sort of came from our conversation about how the hackathon was a success in technical terms, and so he's going to share with us principles about working with Drupal. Brad, over to you and your session.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sharing it right now. Let's confirm that it's running. All right, it should be up on the screen.
I can see it, and it's beautiful. I love it. I'm going to, may I steal that?
Sure, I'll send you the images themselves.
Awesome, fantastic.
All right, well, thank you for having me for this podcast Drupal Camp. I'll dive right into some of the things that we've got here. So first off, I'm Brad. We covered that in the interview part. I work for Commercial Progression, and we do Drupal-based websites in Michigan. And yes, we work exclusively with Drupal. It's great, and we probably have a combined 15, 20 years of Drupal experience sitting in our office right now. So going back to Drupal 5, and that combined experience has shaped the way that all of us work. So if you're familiar with Occam's razor, in the movie Contact, the simplest answer is usually correct, and that's actually an oversimplification of Occam's razor. But one thing to note here is that it's not always true. I think that Albert Einstein actually added the correct caveat here. So everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. And how this plays into Drupal development is similar to how it plays out in all kinds of development and in daily life. It may not always be true, for instance, in cooking. A very complex recipe may be much better than a very simple one. At the same time, the converse can be true as well. So in development, generally, having less code to do a particular thing is going to play out for a whole bunch of different reasons. And targeting the simplest base to get the job that you want to get done is advantageous across the board. So if we look at this from a Drupal perspective, and so much of Drupal comes down to entities and how they're fieldable, and it's not in this little drawing here, but along with fields there are properties, at least in D7. So when it comes to fields, you have the form side of things, which would be widgets, and the display side of things, which are formatters. So if you have something that you're writing, and I'm sorry, these may seem like overly obvious kind of truisms, and you may already be thinking in these ways if you're a Drupal developer and listening to this camp session. What I found is that oftentimes taking a breather, going and sitting down in a chair, I suddenly realize that I'm thinking of something way more complex than I have to, and so I kind of dumb myself down. And so probably the best advice from this whole session is let yourself dumb things down. And so from an entity perspective, if you're looking at something,
Brad,
you're like,
Brad,
sure.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but does that mean that things need to be as stupid as possible, but no stupider?
Perhaps dumb wasn't the right word. I guess simple and dumb are not the same thing. So I guess taking a breather can help simplify things, but not make them dumber.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting, but I had to get that one in.
Sure. So a lot of times if the first pass says, well, maybe I'm going to go into the node view, like hook node view, or something at the node level, oftentimes that means that it might be correct to do it at the field level, at the field attached level, or with the formatter itself. And I'm sort of glossing over view modes, and I'm not sure that I'm going to get back to them in any substantive way, but I find that they're really great. And so in times when you're going to be displaying an entity somewhere else, like in views, often kind of modeling out what the content is and where it's being displayed takes it beyond the page and default and teaser that you get out of the box. And luckily, it's really easy to add view modes from either code or using DS, or there's a entity view mode module that does it real nice. So, so the idea would be kind of a bottom-up when it comes to entities, starting at the formatter and then the field itself. And then finally, if you have to do it at the entity level, that would be the last option when you're looking at just an entity on its own. And so this translates into views too. Typically, since views is dealing with mostly entity data that's being pulled in, if you can take care of what you need to do before you hit the view, that's going to probably save you some heartache. But since views dictates the way that an interface works, especially with exposed filters and things like that, sometimes you have to do it at the views level. And when you do, rather than using the execute and display hooks and the query hooks that go pre and post, a lot of times doing it at the level that you're working with can segment your code in a way and make it easier to find what it is that you were working on if you have to go back in or if you're picking up somebody else's code. So once again, it would be another bottom-up principle when it comes to views. And then I'm going to go off on a wild tangent in the next few slides. So this is the build-up for it. When it comes to rendering, there are a whole bunch of different ways that things go down, and this is an incredible oversimplification of that. But the same as with if you're trying to do something and your first thought is do it with an entity. If your first thought is to do it at the page level, chances are that's not necessary, and it could cause performance issues. So typically you wouldn't hook into a region, but maybe you'd hook into a block. And blocks, they hold stuff, and they can hold forms and views and entities and all manner of things. So the overwhelming preference is to get to that stuff before it becomes a block, because oftentimes a block already holds rendered content before when you get to it, when you alter it. So getting to whatever that stuff is important. But the great thing about it is you can have a site that's all blocks, and all of those blocks are holding stuff. And that's why I heart Blockify. The Blockify module takes the common site elements, so site name, page title, breadcrumbs, tabs, actions, all the things that you would find in your page.tpl.php. It takes those out of the templates and puts them into blocks, so you can place them using the core block UI. I cannot recommend Blockify enough. And even though this slide looks kind of dirty, what Blockify allows you to do is make your page.tpl look very clean. So I tend to be very hesitant about putting anything in the page template that isn't a declaration of a region. Maybe like one wrapper div or something like that, but for the most part it's just region declarations in my page. And I love that. I think it's really cool. So we have sort of a mantra in our office, and you can find it all over the place, and sometimes we walk in and it's written somewhere new. So I've got a few pictures here for you. Everything's a block. That's my personal monitor, so every time I look up I see that. And then it's behind my coworker Chris there. And obviously everything isn't a block, so it's kind of terrible that is a statement that we claim to be true, but at a placement level, at a level of thinking how to implement something, it's really helpful. So we had a client that sells industrial machinery, and they had a way to search for the front end user to find equipment by category, and the top area, instead of trying to inject the category information on each page like on a taxonomy term page, we implemented that as a block, and it allows very flexible placement. We can reorder it and put it in a new place without having to really dig into even views. So no code changes, no template changes, just, hey, that's a block. I know how to deal with blocks, and that's what it comes down to. So probably talked way too much about blocks already, so I'll be moving on and probably revisiting that. So rather than kind of walk through a set process that we have, and I'm sure wherever you work that you have a process in place and that it works to your organization's needs, rather than just walking through what we do and how we do it, I kind of formulated this into some guidelines and made them as clear as possible by going with do's and don'ts. And I figured we start with the don'ts because they're always more fun. In a lot of cases, these don'ts come from the projects where we inherit code from other developers, or realistically, it's also from mistakes that we've made on past sites. So the very first and foremost one is don't PHP in your database. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's probably the probably just like the biggest frustration is trying to track down where the heck something is coming from, and it's doubly frustrating. Just the idea of turning on PHP filter or views PHP or something like that, that it's like admitting that you're not willing to figure out what the right way to do it was in the first place. So a lot of the other don'ts on this list don't hurt my heart, but finding PHP in the database is it's a sad Brad moment. Okay, so the same general principle as don't putting PHP in the database is making sure to continue to separate content from behavior from presentation. And so contemplate was more of a D6 was more popular in that time. But like even the fences module, which is really cool and it does have applications. I'm not going to say don't ever use it, especially if you're getting into SEO territory. But the idea would be, if you can't find why something is happening or where it's happening quickly and be able to override it, or have somebody else come into a project and be able to understand it quickly, these are two modules, these are two approaches to building out displays that can be confusing and problematic. And along with that is panels, and it's another one like fences where, of course, there are reasons to install panels, but there are people who install panels on day one without having a clear reason of why, and then when somebody else goes in to try to figure out what's going on, there's a lot of clicking, there's overriding of core UI that can be very frustrating. So this one's something that we kind of joke about internally quite a bit, is like, oh, we're getting a project, I wonder if it'll use panels. A couple of other modules that go along with panels as possible day one installs that may or may not cause that kind of trouble. Display Suite and Context, both great modules, both give you a lot of power, but if an entire site is built that way, it can cause trouble. So the principle of simplicity, going back to Occam's razor and Einstein's razor, you wouldn't want to like shoot yourself in the foot. So simplicity-wise, um, uh, just trying to pick the right modules off the bat is and minimize the number that you have to use is good. So probably one of the more fun things that I found in a project that I inherited was views within views within views, and it's a major performance concern, and there's a lot of configuration that goes on in making sure that you know where things are coming from. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but like views field view is it has a very narrow use case. So, as with 2 slides ago, by picking just the modules that you need and picking ones that are going to be reliable for you, you're promoting that simplicity. So when I go and look at a module I haven't used before, just from the drupal.org/project/whatever page, look at the number of installs, look at the top and the right-hand side, how many maintainers are on it, when was the last time they committed, how many commits do they have. Then I look in the issue queue and see sort of ratios, see whether there's activity going on there. And then looking at the repository viewer on the right-hand side, I like to do a quick check and see if the commits match up to issue numbers, because that's usually a good sign. And then even taking a look at the code itself and seeing what it's doing can be really helpful when it comes to reviewing modules. So if you're trying to minimize the number, having redundant modules is going to obviously be a deterrent to the simplicity. So do you really need more than one modal library or slideshow or something of that nature? Can CTools take you a certain distance before you have to use an external library in the first place? So those are the sort of questions. And typically, if you're installing a second slideshow module, it's an indication that there's a lack of design consistency as well. Repeat this quite a bit. Don't hack core. I'm sure you've all heard it before. And then along the same lines, hacking a contrib module is can cause you the same sort of trouble. So we had a client that had quick tabs, and they had a custom quick tab style, and they put it in the module directory. So when we went and ran update, did a code update, that all got wiped out. So now those quick tab styles were gone, and we had to go back through the git commit history and grab that and then put it into a separate place. So really doing anything in those contrib folders can cause you trouble when it comes to maintainability. All right, don't litter. If you're done with a file, delete it, and it'll be in the commit history. I guess sort of one mindset that I have when it comes to developing is somebody else is going to see this code at some point, and when they do, I don't want them to be mad at me. So like putting .legacy at the end of a file and just leaving it there instead of deleting it and letting the revision history take care of it. That's the sort of thing where I would be ashamed of myself. So yeah, don't litter. In the same way that if you're inside of a file, commenting out code or leaving like whole blocks of a file commented out is more or less the same as having a completely separate file just staying there. So use Git for what it's intended for and keep everything as clean as possible. The Drupal community coding standards, which can be checked with the coder module and coder tough love, they're there for a purpose. They make it easier to get up to speed on a particular project or diagnose problems, and a lot of IDEs will help you do this right off the bat. So there's really no excuse not to indent things properly and use proper spacing and things like that. So I highly encourage that. So a sort of formidable code smell that you can find pretty quickly in a theme is if you look in the templates directory and there's more than one or maybe two page templates, and all the nodes are broken out by type. Usually that means from a node standpoint that the field UI isn't going to be very useful for managing the display. And from a page perspective, any change that you make in one page template, you're more or less likely going to have to do from 2, 3, as many page templates as there are. So if you can implement it without doing that, all the better. And then, especially when it comes to just plain markup, don't hard code anything that's more than a line. Render arrays can be just as much of a pain, and templates aren't very easy to implement, but they often will pay off down the road. So moving away from the negative and going into the positive, these are things, helpful tips that we've picked up along the way and share with each other at our weekly dev meetings. So first, and fortunately Drush will respect this, is if you're in sites all modules, if you open that up for any of our projects, there are going to be 3 folders in there: contrib, custom, and features. And contrib just holds contrib modules. Custom is stuff that we wrote, and then features is automatically generated from the features module. So it's a really easy way to segment different types of modules, and if you're trying to get up to speed on what's custom on a particular site, it's easy enough to go in and open one folder and see that stuff. So this is one that kind of bit me at on our recent project. Was we had a client that wanted prices, and it wasn't a commerce project. It was but they still wanted to have price fields, and I implemented that as a number. It was a decimal, and then we go into a meeting, and they're like, "Well, we want to be able to specify which currency it is." And so if I had spent just a few more minutes right off the bat saying, rather than be a decimal field, this should be a commerce price field, then I would have benefited from the community right off the bat and wouldn't have had to re-import all the data on the staging site. So yeah, whenever you're trying to figure out what a field does, yeah, so price is a good example, addresses, things of that nature. Having that right from day one can save you a lot of time. I mentioned Blockify before. Just do it, and feel the benefit in your page template file, and when you have to set visibility on something. So here are a few easy win modules that are in our internal install profile. Global Redirect, Path Auto, Honeypot, Chosen, and Elements. These are ones that you can turn on and they work, and even the defaults tend to be exactly what they should be, so configuration is minimal. And keep a list of the modules that you use on all projects, and just be able to drop them into the next one or make your own install profile. So this one played into the hackathon. So if you can get something done entirely with contrib, with well-established modules, that's the best way to go. You're not relying on code that you have to test or untested code. You're doing things the way that the rest of the community has agreed to do them. So if you can get 95% of the way on a project without writing any code at all, that's great. So yeah, let contrib lead the way. So this is for on your laptop. I've never installed SendMail on my local machine because I don't want to send out a whole bunch of emails to who knows accidentally. So if you need to test email, if you're using like Mail System and My Mail and all those things in conjunction, the SMTP module will let you actually send emails, and the reroute email module will make sure that they only go to one person. So if you accidentally do send off some mass mailing, it's just going to fill your inbox rather than sending individual messages to thousands of people. When it comes time to write custom code, we have a glue module that we just drop in every project that already contains useful stuff. But if it comes time to extend a particular field, have a special field formatter, or do something like a views argument a plugin or something of that nature, starting that off as a reusable module, and then creating your own repo for it, and then potentially turning it into something that becomes contrib. That's a lot of what Drupal's about. So kind of just asking yourself the question, how can I make this general? How can I make this generic and reusable? Can save time on the next project. So like I said, we have a drop-in glue code module, so it's compro_custom, and so without having to create, spend that 45 seconds to create a .info and a .module file with the name of the project or whatever you would call that module, this is something you can just drop right in. So we have that for the glue code module. We have it for compro_add minimal, and we have it compro_tau. So our sub themes that we would use site to site can just be dropped in and then modified. So one thing that the glue code module does out of the box is there's a very simple menu callback in there, and the callback just says return, and it's a single space string, and so you can set the front to /blank, and in doing so, the entire front page can be built as blocks, whether or not you have content to go with it. If you have a particular view, that's probably a better way to go, but with a lot of front pages, it seems like there's tons of custom things going on, and it's very block-centric often. So the blank page callback comes in handy. So one part of saving some heartache is where you would put theming functions, especially theme overrides. And the examples in the next slide. But the two options would be altering the theme registry and then writing a theme function in a module, or writing theme underscore in a template.php. So this example, make buttons into buttons, is sort of an exercise for the listener. I had implemented this as a registry alter in a module, and what ended up happening was that my admin theme was not happy about all of my inputs turning into buttons. So moving it into the template.php as a theming function for button saved some trouble when I wanted to go to manage display and click the little gears. But the reason to make buttons into buttons in the first place is when you have an iOS device specifically, styling inputs with CSS can have some really unintended consequences, whereas buttons reliably take their CSS. So one fun practice, because often we'll spend hours in views clicking checkboxes, reordering fields, things of that nature, is if you have a preference for view modes and manage display in the core entity UIs, then you can render those entities and pick which view mode you want to use, and then manage which things are going to show up for a particular entity on a particular row. This doesn't work so well for table displays and views, but it works great for unformatted lists and things of that nature. So it's been something of a time saver, especially for slideshows where it's an image plus additional content. We can have multiple content types as long as they all have a field image. We can play around with what gets displayed from the rendered entities rather than trying to have big jumbles of fields. So one of the easy win modules I mentioned was Chosen. It's a library from Atlassian. They make Bitbucket and stuff like that. At least I believe they are the people who did this. And Chosen takes any select element, HTML select element, and makes it much easier to use. So you get search, multi-select is really easy. It's just really nice. And so along with that, avoid redundant modules concept is there are a whole bunch of different ways out there to do multi-select on field widgets. Chosen is a way that you can introduce consistency because it just works. So let's say that you have a view, and this is a very specific test case, but you want to put a tab onto a node. So it would be node /star/ my thing here, and you only want to show it to show up in very particular cases or for a particular content type. The way that you could do that is by specifying it in an access function or a menu access function. So if you do that, you're going to want to call the original access function, and the way that you can do that is with call user func array, and you can pass in the original arguments using this, get the value back as the return, and then write a quick conditional to make sure that the original access function passes, as well as whatever additional access you're trying to figure out. So in general, it's a good thing when it comes to overrides. And another function name slide. Typically, if we have something that's not facing a user, it's probably an entity, and if it's something that is facing a user, then it's specifically a node. So with ECK entities, they're usually things that we're dealing with on the admin side, and for that reason, hook custom access paths, one of my favorite hooks, makes it really easy to say, hey, make that use the admin theme instead of the regular theme. This one's come back to bit me a couple of times, so I figure it's worth pointing out here. The meta tag module, which for most purposes is an easy win. If you have a view that has, for instance, an exposed filter on it, if the page title is supposed to change based on the value of the exposed filter, meta tag may prevent that because it caches page titles. So this is one place where you may have to manually clear the cache in code in order to get the page titles to play nice. And it has never been fun. This one's kind of fun. Let's say you have an ECK entity and it doesn't need a title property, or a field collection, or pretty much any entity. And even though it doesn't have a title property, you still have people who would be editing on it. In those circumstances, you can set a label callback in the entity info and make the title on the top of the page title, be whatever you want it to be. And then that title can be used in views and other places where you would ordinarily use it, like a node title, for instance. So label callbacks are fun and can be very useful. Going back to the very first don't, if you feel like you're about to implement something by putting PHP into your database, tokens is often a good answer. Implementing tokens is one of the easier things to do, and then using them in views and other places, it's pretty straightforward, and site builders can benefit from it. So often that's like doing additional string operations in views. And then this is one I had thought of sort of recently, is like if you have two fields and the display that you're looking for is based on those two fields, but it's just a single thing, hook field extra fields is probably a good way to do it. If it's the value of only a single field that you're trying to display, then just a regular formatter on that field is probably the way to go. One caveat with the extra fields is the markup for extra fields are different from regular ones. So if you want a label or things like that, then you may have to kind of fake it. And then this one is a big part of the hackathon, and a way to do things pretty quickly once you have everything set up is so you have an entity type, and then you have a view that goes along with that entity type. You can go into features, just select the entity type, and just select the view, and it should pick up the field bases, the field instances, and all the dependencies that you need to go along with it, and so you don't need to manually rebuild it every time. But one thing to be careful with field bases is whatever the first, usually a node that you build a feature out of, may try to take like the field body as a field base and roll that into the feature. And if you do that, then all your other features might depend on that feature. So it may be worthwhile to omit any core field bases from any of your features, or to roll it into a separate feature on its own. All right, this is a quick one-liner, and it's pretty much the reason that we have a in-house admin subtheme. Is this piece of CSS makes any field in a views display that is excluded, that's not showing up, it'll make that in the views UI turn gray, so you can see which fields are actually displaying and which ones are being hidden at a quick glance. This one isn't Drupal specific, but from a page performance perspective, download all those web font files. You only need WOFF and EOT files, and declare them in your CSS and send them off from the same origin as all the other resources that you're sending. If you use Google Web Fonts, it's making a call to a CSS file, which makes a call to additional web font files. So it's this big long chain. I don't know whether they've made that better, but at least at one time, using Google's own tool will cause a performance hit from their performance monitoring suite. So also having those files in one place and knowing that they're going to be there, maybe you can sleep just a little bit easier at night. The block class module lets you put classes right onto blocks, and views comes out of the box with a CSS class for the view display itself and for a whole bunch of different elements, rows, fields, the whole deal, and you can specify them. And by putting classes on things, and especially making reusable classes, you're making maintenance easier, and also enforcing some consistency. So if you have a grid of 3 things in one place, why not be able to reuse that grid of 3 things on the next view that you make? A lot of people don't like this, but I'm partial to it. I like to nest all of my CSS that's related, so the base class and then all of its dependencies. And the very last part of each of those little segments are the media queries that go along with it. And what's great about this is if you decide to take out an entire piece of functionality, you know that every piece of CSS that you're taking out is going with it just in that one place. So with the little media queries, and the other part of this is it helps you mentally say to yourself, this media query, this breakpoint that I'm setting is a breakpoint for the content rather than a breakpoint for some device. So it makes it a truly responsive rather than an adaptive site. So I really like the little media queries, and from testing, from a blog post that I read about testing, it doesn't make a difference whether you use one big media query or a whole bunch of little ones. So views comes out of the box with first and last, and a lot of starter themes. I believe Zen comes with first and last for blocks as well, so each region would have a first and a last in it. If your theme doesn't come with that out of the box, it's something that you can kind of unabashedly steal from Zen, and that can be really helpful. For instance, when you're doing something of a columnar layout, so the last block in something would have different margin than the middle ones. There's really no reason not to run Coder, especially from that pride perspective, from that not wanting to get beaten up by the next guy perspective. And at the end of it, you kind of learn something new every time that you run Coder, and especially if you run Coder Tough Love, because it doesn't let you get away with very much. And so it's a good way to pick up on the coding standards, and fixing things helps you learn to enforce the coding standards. And then the API docs, the documentation team for Drupal.org in general writes some really great stuff. When you go to the API docs especially, seeing what the function arguments are for hooks, seeing which of them is passed by reference, and seeing whether or not there's a return value, and if there is, what's expected. If you kind of take a look at that and do the legwork ahead of time, it could save you some debugging trouble later. So those are all the do's. Nothing really jumped to mind as I was talking, but following those sort of procedures, whether in the context of trying to make a site in 23 hours or whether trying to build a giant project for a multinational corporation over the course of many weeks, these sort of tips can come in handy for that. So thank you very much for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you too much, and thanks again.
Brad, there's so much, so many valuable tips, so much information. I think, frankly, we need to maybe write down a summary of some of those. It was really, really good. Thank you so much. It's nice to see again, and it proves itself every time, right? The how our community is groups of dedicated professionals who figure out all the tough problems, and the first thing that we want to do is like, hey, I solved this so that you never have to deal with it again, and it's very generous of you to share all this stuff with us. So thank you for that. Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So share your camera now so we can get one more look at you, and then
let me see if I can.
So this might get tacked onto the back of the podcast as well. Hey, there you are.
There I am.
Great. Hey, so thanks for taking the time to put all that together. It's really, really valuable. I am looking forward to putting this together for the Acquia podcast and for Jam's virtual Drupal camp. Bits and pieces of this will be on acquia.com/podcasts for you to find. So if you're listening to the audio-only version, come and see the text and the slides and the video and all that good stuff. And anything else you want to add from near Detroit there, Brad?
I just appreciate the invitation. It was good talking to you. Hope you have a great day.
You too. Hey, thanks. Take care. And see you at something soon, I hope, a Drupal camp or something cool.
Excellent.